In 3, 2, 1.
Okay, hello. We are here doing the talkback for Blossoming 2021, a play reading series. We just had the first ever virtual showing of the American life of Diego Rivera y Kahlo. Sorry if I said that incorrectly. But I firmly believe that talkbacks are an opportunity to process the production as a community. So let's get into this. I want us to all, three of us, take a deep breath collectively before we start. Look at us go. We're already creating community right here. So thanks so much for everybody who is watching from home. I'd like to prompt you right now to put any questions that you have for our cast and crew in the chat, and I will read those as we go along. But before we start, I'd like all of us to introduce ourselves. So let's say our names, pronouns, what role we played within the project, and then popcorn the next person. So I'll go first. My name's Jocelyn. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the moderator, so I didn't do anything for this beautiful production. I'm going to pass it on to Emilio.
Hi everyone, I'm Emilio, he, him pronouns, and I was the playwright for this story, and I will pass it on to Monica.
Hi everyone, I am Monica, and I directed the American life of Dieguito Rivera y Kahlo.
And you did a fantastic job. I'm just going to say right now. As we begin, I'd like to open up by, of course, asking a really baseline question to Emilio. Can you tell us about what the inspiration for this play was?
Yes, the inspiration for the play, I was going to open up my phone and see if I saw the picture saved, was I had seen the picture or the painting, Henry Ford Hospital, that Frida Kahlo did. I don't know if you could see it on this Zoom screen right there, but that's the one that I saw. And that was the inspiration for me. I just loved the painting, and I decided to do more research about that specific painting. That's when I found out that Frida Kahlo, Diego Rivera were here in Detroit in the 30s. And I didn't even know at that point about Diego Rivera's murals in the DIA. So learning about all of that, and then also learning that at the same time, the repatriation movement of forcefully and manipulation, a combination of forceful and manipulation tactics to get Mexican and Mexican-American individuals to move to Mexico out of the United States, was happening at the same time that they're bringing in Mexican artists to come create work in America, which was such an interesting parallel that I wanted to learn more about, and then try and ask myself and the audience questions through creating a work about it.
Wow. Yeah, it's an incredibly beautifully done play, but I think that that dichotomy, right, is shown immediately, just like the invitation of like, here, have have like artists represent America, right? And like American citizens and American life, but also we're going to be doing voluntary deportations, right? Isn't that just like I think that it's really beautiful how it's sort of a timeless piece, right? How it's something that can be felt in like current culture, as well as like seen and learned from in the past. Speaking to your own personal experiences, both of you, can you talk about how you see yourselves reflected in this work? Monica, will you go first?
Yeah, sure. Emilio and I, in the early stages of his process and the play development, we started, and when I read the first draft, the first half, just going into the imagery that Emilio had created and the idea. I mean, we just uncovered, it kept uncovering things. And I think that specifically it resonated with me from the perspective of a Mexican American woman, and my history with my family here in this country. And I'm fourth generation, but still getting information and the suggestion that I don't belong, or my work and who I am as a person is on the margins still. And so we talked a lot about the literal miscarry that the Magdalena character experiences, but those miscarried versions of ourselves. What does it mean to be in a hinterland, so to speak, to not really have a place? And so I latched onto that, and then I latched onto, I think it was kind of a simple moment in one of the first drafts, but Magdalena and her fur coat. And I just kept saying to Emilio, like, God, there's just something about that, like the way we perceive ourselves versus the way we want to be perceived, versus when we slowly start to buy into an idea of who we can become. So this play resonated, it still resonates with me on the level of aspect of self, identity, especially if you belong to another group in this country that's not of the dominant race, the dominant culture. What does it mean to exist, to do your art? And where do we draw that inspiration? What does home look like for people like us? Yeah. I could go on, but I'll just leave it at that.
I mean, I could listen to you go on. That was really beautiful. Emilio, do you want to speak about how you yourself feel like you're reflected in the work as well?
Yes. Well, I could also listen to Monica forever. I've told Monica she has a beautiful speaking voice and needs to do a podcast. But also, that the conversations I had with Monica were so helpful in the writing process, developing process, expanding process of this piece, and then bringing the actors in. So I see myself. Obviously, I was drawn to Dieguito and the little baby in the painting. And that was sort of the first impetus for me, and then just thinking about also my parents. I'm not exactly sure what my generation lies, because both my parents they each have a parent who's like first generation and a parent who's fifth or sixth generation. So I'm like, what exactly is my generation count? But yeah, that idea of just not feeling 100% belonging anywhere on either side was what resonated with me. And then hearing Monica, getting to have discussions with Monica, and then also getting to have discussions with the whole cast, and how their experiences as being Latino in America, everyone had different experiences, but we also had parallels. It was like a Venn diagram where we had moments where we all had the same experiences and moments where we had different experiences that spoke to ourselves. And I think that for me was probably the most helpful thing in the writing process, is being in the room with Monica and the actors, or being in the Zoom with Monica and the actors, and being able to hear their experiences and what parts resonate with them, and really expand upon those and use that inspiration to create the next drafts.
So yeah, I mean, you're already talking about your process here. Let's get into questions about that. Did you, when you started within this production, this play series with The Vagrancy, did you already have like a draft of this created, or?
No, there was no draft. And actually, when they had reached out to us, they had reached out to playwrights, recommending, just suggesting we apply. And I'd asked, do we need to have a draft to submit? And she said, no, we want something that you're gonna create during this process. And so I had no draft, just an idea, and was sort of just trying to meet the deadlines and create from those deadlines.
So this is like a fully organic piece for you, which is, I think, really beautiful. Can you tell us more about, your process? Did you just like sit on Zoom calls actively trying to get like personal backgrounds from each person who was involved, or was it more like brainstorming by yourself and then also like listening to other people's feedback?
Yeah, I'd had the idea, and I'd actually done a lot of the research about 4 or 5 years ago when I first found the painting, and I just never put the dialogue on a page. I just had ideas and notebooks and plot point suggestions and things that I wanted to happen, but I'd never actually written out the dialogue of exactly what are they saying. So that came throughout the writers' meetings, but really the shape of the play came from being in the read-throughs with Monica and the cast, and hearing everyone's ideas, and even I think the first read-through, even before we had just read the script, and before we even talked about areas of growth or things we want to change, people were just organically sharing their experiences of being Latino in America, and their parents' experiences, and cultural experiences, and that's where that sort of conversation came from that shaped the script, was after that first read through, actually. But Monica and I had had some conversations before that. We got to do some Zoom calls, and she had recommended a podcast to me, actually, the Anything for Selena podcast. So I listened to that and got some ideas about commentary that I wanted to make on, or questions that I wanted to ask about American culture through a Latino lens. And then also, like Monica said, that coat that she brought up, I just told Monica about this picture that I saw of Frida in a fur coat. And I think one of the things I really love with having Monica as a director is that way that she sees what you're excited about, and gives you that like motivational push of like, go for it, yes, run, explore that, see what that is, figure out what that is, because there's something there. And she was absolutely right. I think that became like a huge plot point thread after she had encouraged me to just go for that, figure out what that is, ask yourself what that is, and figure out that question.
Absolutely. I think that you can see like throughout the play, that question sort of coming to fruition. Like, why is the coat like significant? And then we get the answer, right? But I don't think that, for Magdalena's character, I don't think that it really sinks in for her at first, even though he says all of that. I'm not going to give away too much in the talkback. I'm not going to say too much, but I do think that it's like really beautiful how it's a slow progression. And I think that that's how real truth happens, right? Like the slow burning realization. That's really beautiful. We have a question from the audience. It's just a comment. Sorry. There was a question mark, so it confused me. It says, so the cast got to contribute their own experiences to the story. That's so cool. I agree. That's really cool. I want to ask Monica a question now. I'd like to know, how difficult was it to direct remotely? Like, was it like challenging? I see the face.
Oh man, oh humans. It is not my preferred method. I'll be, for theater makers, and my work is mostly in the theater. I mean, film and TV, and I'm also an actor, and I sympathized absolutely with our cast, because I know what it's like to perform to a static screen, even though you have a partner giving you something. I know, because I do the Zoom auditions and the self-tape submissions, and there's nothing like being in the room. And so a lot of things that we feel energetically couldn't be accomplished in this way, because we just don't have, we have Zoom lag, right? So people aren't matching up. It's not quite what it would be in the room. Things that can be accomplished with a gesture, you now have to accommodate in a screen. And we were, the actors in the cast very fortunately, because we're still operating in really strange and tenuous circumstances, is that a lot of them were busy and doing other work. And for that, I say kudos to the American theater for doing the thing during this thing and creating work for artists. So we had to navigate scheduling. And so it's not like you go into the rehearsal room every day and you're picking up where you left off the day before, right? It's like we're picking up where we left off a month before, because we rehearsed everything. And so even, for my own part, having to, slide back into the world that we were creating and then try to approximate that with, all of us, like, people coming from rehearsals, and there was no space, and we were operating on a timeline where we could just say, like, okay. And, as best as we tried, like, okay, let's center ourselves. Where were we? Where are we? What are we doing next? There's nothing like that in-person energy exchange. And so I learned so much during this process, and watching it, about my own work, like we do. But I think I'm happy I did it. And kudos to Vagrancy and Blossoming. I've been watching the plays. I think all the directors have done a fantastic job. But I know a lot of it came with in service to, I think, excellence that was, we had some things stacked against us. So I'm very grateful that the story got communicated, and we did it at the end of the day. Was that too long? I'm sorry, y'all.
It absolutely isn't. You don't need to cut yourself off at all. Don't feel the need to do that. We both, me and Emilio, have agreed that we want to hear you keep talking. So
You can keep talking.
So talking about the characters, right? Thinking about Diego and Magdalena specifically. Did Monica, was it difficult for you to get them to connect at all? Or did that just kind of happen naturally?
Well, we did have conversations. I mean, both of our actors are gifted and young. So I would always tell them, Fabian and Eva, hi, you two, if you're watching. They had the unfortunate, I guess, but also fortunate circumstance of being young. We found some young actors. And so we did talk about the history of the relationship and what it was, like Magdalena, Frida's history, and what she had experienced, very grown up, well before her time. And she was a revolutionary in Diego as well. So we see them at this moment when the play opens, and they have a history underneath them. So what we talked about was, what do we do to boost that element of the story to get them to connect? Because they love and they fight in the same way, right? They push each other's buttons. They, in a lot of ways, sometimes they talk to each other like siblings, which I love, because it creates this big dynamic of these two very, very powerful people who were extraordinary visionaries. How do you contain that in one room? There's always that give and take. So we talked about those moments when Diego was, when he acquiesces, when he's softer to Magdalena. Where does she push back? Where does she relent? Where is she, engaging, I guess, for lack of a better term, in that softer gender role? The wife, my big, strong husband. So these little clues that you see in the dialogue that could give us a way in to talk about that connection, I think, was there absolutely from Emilio's writing, and certainly helped us out.
Monica, I never noticed this until you kind of hinted at this right now, that Eva and Fabian are like the youngest in the cast, right? Mm-hmm. And Daniel, who played Dieguito, the youngest character, is, I think, the oldest in the cast, actually. Mm-hmm. So what an interesting balance that they all had the challenge of like going outside of their actual age range to access the characters. I hadn't noticed that until you just brought that up right now.
Yeah, I know. Isn't that wild? We had some fun with casting, and everybody was perfect.
Well, they're also like, playing these characters who are larger than life, right? Like people who existed who like had their own histories, their own experiences that were and will be, you know, immortalized, right? And so like I can't imagine how challenging it must have been to like write that, to direct that, and then also to like star in that. You know, the actors did an amazing job. I just want to say that if they are watching, you guys crushed it. Absolutely fantastic. Just throwing it out to the audience who's watching again, make sure that you're popping questions in the chat. We do have one question. Matthew says, were there any moments of discovery where you realized you could use being virtual? Like to your advantage. I'm assuming that's what you mean.
I'll say just in general, I think it was a really cool experience that, I mean, Monica and Ava and I are all Michigan based, so it probably would have been still reasonable for us to meet up. And Monica and I are a little bit closer in distance to each other, but Ava's still a little bit further away from us. And then the other men are all like in the Chicago area, Illinois area. So just the fact that we were able to all meet together, I don't know if that would have been possible if we had to meet in person. At least the men, that would have been a really big challenge. Maybe Ava, Monica, and I could have still all met up. We all would have had to drive a little bit more though, but so it's nice to, if we could all just be in our home space and log on, and that made scheduling rehearsals, I'm sure, easier for Monica and Ava to work out, because then it's just, what time are you free, rather than having to like calculate, and you're gonna have to do a 2-hour drive, or I'm gonna have to do a 2-hour drive back, or any of that stuff. So I think that was a blessing in disguise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's such a great question, Matthew, because when I was watching the whole thing just a bit ago, I noticed that because there's disconnect in the story. There's people trying to connect, forgetting how they know each other. There are those schisms of, how do I know you and who are you? And I thought, well, I think the virtual format worked for that disorientation. It did for me. I'm not sure if I'm the only one, but I thought like this, it makes more sense than I thought it would virtually, because we had, those jumps and images of the screen of the people and who and where are we. And I thought this is absolutely what it feels like to be in the world, is to feel that kind of disorientation for a minute. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
I also, I'm going to answer a little bit and say that I think that the soundtrack felt more haunting than I think it might have, like if it were a play in person. Just the way that the sound takes over, where there's a repeated loop in the song that's played. I thought that was like spooky in a way that wouldn't have been, like, might not have been as spooky in person. Like that was like, it chilled me.
Yeah, I heard that too, Jocelyn. I was like, oh my God, when you watch these like faces just trying to navigate, like what the hell is going on in the space? For me, it struck me the same way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a really beautiful scene. I know, I don't know. I know that you guys, while creating this, you were able to see probably glimpses of what the finished product might be. But was tonight like your first time being able to watch the full play?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, yeah.
Yeah.
And we, I got to like obviously sit in when they were filming, and I wasn't able to attend all the days, but I was able to attend some of the days, and that was really great to just observe that filming process, and getting to see the actors play in the moment, and but also getting to see Monica like redirect them, like, oh, okay, let's try it, this way as we do another take of it. So it kind of got to be like that theater moment as well. But then you're also realizing that you're watching, if you're watching that second take or third take or whatnot, you're watching the take that's actually going to be used in the actual product. So I guess I had not realized, I had not put that together obviously in hindsight, it's like, yeah, obviously that's what it is. But as you're watching it, I was just watching it more from like the perspective of how do I want to continue work on the play afterwards, and watching the scene be done, 2 or 3 times, then I really get to see what's working with the actors, what Monica sees as the trajectory of the scene, want to maybe make changes in the future, because this isn't the final draft. This is just a draft that we have for now to be able to hopefully continue to take more places afterwards.
Absolutely. Yeah. I just wanted to ask if you had any like scenes that stuck out to you as like virtual. But I also want to ask things about what your plans are for the future. I'm gonna put a pin in that question and ask what I originally meant to ask, which is as far as like seeing it tonight, were there scenes that might maybe surprise you as you were watching it in full?
I think I love it anyways, because it's so just fantastically written and clever. But the baseball scene, the baseball playing scene, we see this, like, you can't imagine in your mind Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera playing baseball in a hotel room. I loved it so much. I loved rehearsing it, I loved filming it, and I loved watching it because I love the play that Fabian and Eva found in it. I thought that worked extraordinarily well, the last scene. And now to go back to what Emilio said earlier about when we were rehearsing and recording and realizing, oh, I'm watching a take that's going to be used. Some of what we did where we were, finessing things or getting really into the minutia of the characters and complex character work, we had to use takes that weren't as tech glitch heavy. And so I know that if we were, doing it in person, those things that, Zoom gives us, which is great, but also takes away from us, is that energy. And so I watched some of it like, oh man, we that was one of the earlier takes, and maybe this wasn't communicated, and not the fault of the actors, but the conditions of what we have, right? But to go back to what I was saying about the scenes that stuck out, those to the end is just haunting to me and beautiful. The deportation is super heavy because we draw a parallel to what's happening now, and there's no easy resolution to what's happening at the border. But to know the history of Mexican Americans in this country, our contributions to this country, that scene is so weighted for me when I think of my grandfathers who were laborers, who came here to do the work. And I know my family stories about what it was to exist in Texas in these towns, and to be not looked on favorably by society, by communities. My father's stories about traveling to the South in the 80s with his siblings and being denied service. That makes me think of all of that. And for a lot of us, especially, and there are so many things I think that we are not monoliths. We say that a lot. Latinas, we are not. We all have our own individual experiences. I'm also mixed. I know I have the benefit of having lighter skin, but I know that for my father and his siblings, what it was to grow up and look like them, what it was to speak English with a dialect, to have Spanish taken away from them in order to assimilate, those repercussions continue throughout generations because it informed the way I grew up. It informed, the fact that I'm not fluent in Spanish. And so for me, that last scene is almost like we see how we are where we are today, that waiting room and the rhetoric around it. And Emilio didn't go into the politics of it, but all you need is that one little newspaper clipping. And I was hell bent on finding it. And I knew that he found it somewhere. I was like, Emilio took it word for word. I scoured for hours, like Googling, I paid for this newspaper subscription. Like, I have to find this because I need to see for myself what words they used And it's not unlike anything we have heard over the past 4 or 5 years. And so in my heart, that scene is so heavy. But also there's that hope and promise of creating your own path of what does home look like? Where do I fit in? And I think that we all have a place. There is a place where we all fit in. It's a matter of what train are we going to get on to get there?
Yeah, I think for me, the scene with the putting on the suit, I'm so fascinated because, like Monica was mentioning, we have this Zoom limitation, and that's such like a visual thing I was seeing in my head, like literally people putting on suit and makeshifting suspenders and whatnot. So I think that is just like a testament to the actors and to Monica for guiding them to get to the emotional truth of the scene, so that even though we don't have the visual of seeing people put on pants, we can still like go in our mind's eye into the imagination and see that scene and see what it represents about literally not fitting in and literally feeling like you don't have a place and you're in the wrong body in the wrong space, and capturing that emotional essence, I think was really cool to see, because I think that's a big challenge on Zoom when you can't do the blocking that it's intended to do.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that I cried at the last scene. And you know, just hearing Monica articulate it, I almost just cried just now. But I just want to say that yeah, I think that for me it's like I don't have the full breadth of your own experiences, right? I obviously have you know, a different background and different experience of my own, of, you know, being a person of color, living in America, and all of the you know, unique trauma that comes with it. And I think that weight is translated you know, across experiences and identities, that like pain of, you know, through generations and through you know, different you know, different nationalities and all of it, you know, that is something that I think is uniquely American. And so I really love the title as well, you know, just to wrap it all up in a bow, like explaining that this is, you know, a uniquely American experience. I want to give space for the audience to ask questions as well. So Shantae asks, hello, hi, one of our directors in a previous play of the series, asks, I haven't finished watching yet, but Emilio, can you speak to any discoveries you had in hearing and watching the play today, or through rehearsals? Holly, another one of our writers, asks the same thing.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I think I still want to go back and just write some notes from today of what I'm thinking on, because Monica knows I had like my notebook every single rehearsal that we had, and I was just like apologizing frantically to the actors, like, you're looking at the top of my head because I'm writing down notes as you guys are speaking and making discoveries yourself. I'm also making discoveries based on that. So yeah, there's so much that I want to continue exploring. I think what exactly is I think there's still room to grow with what I want to do with the coat, how I want to play in the world of fantasy, this magical realism fantasy world. There's still the question that Monica and I have talked about multiple times of Does it need to be longer? Is it the right length? That's something I'm still processing and still thinking about. And I'm also thinking about that through line thread of the painting and how I want to explore that even more. That was actually both Monica and Daniel were the ones who really champion that idea of that being a through line, which was so helpful to explore. And I think I want to continue to explore that even more. Like this is, like I said, this is like a draft, but this is just for me, just the beginning of figuring out exactly what I want it to look like. So those are 3 big moments that I'm thinking of, but of course there's always tons of little lines and cut this and trim this and elongate this and all of that. But yeah, those are the things that come to my mind right now.
Don't cut anything.
I agree. If anything, add a lot. Yeah. Just thinking about how this is like a culmination of like your work on one of her many beautiful pieces. I think that that makes me emotional too. Just like thinking about like how you're honoring Frida, and how in her life she wasn't honored enough, right? Which is like a consistent experience of a woman of color. So yeah, I think that it's really beautiful that that is like your inspiration for this beautiful play. Yeah,
that's so beautiful that you touched on that, because that's actually something Monica had brought up in one of our very first phone calls and reiterated in another phone call too, is just this idea that in that point of her life, everyone was looking at Diego as like this incredible painter and artist and muralist, and how do we get him to decorate everything in our country? And now and Monica was bringing up like, how crazy would it be for Frida if she knows like right now that like people have her artwork on journals, people have their artwork posted on their walls, people have her artwork on their computer screens, people have their artwork like everywhere in their home, on their phone. Like I even have it on my phone screen now. Like that her artwork has lived beyond her and is in some ways sadly more appreciated now than when she was alive, because how incredible would it be for her to have experienced that while she was alive, to like go to a store downtown and see her painting on a pillow. You know what I mean? Like we were talking, literally we had saw some shops downtown where had like Frida paintings on pillows. But because I think it's unfortunate that she didn't get to experience that while she was alive. But I do think, like you said, it's important to continue to honor her and to honor her work and the incredible legacy she left behind through her art.
Monica, can you talk a bit about how you knew that like coming into the conversation already? Is that just like were you a fan or?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I loved it. I loved the movie when it came out with Salma Hayek and Alfred Molina. But I just loved what she represented, because growing up, her ferocity in terms of being herself, right? And when you're a teenager, you just want to find out who you are. So you like glom onto anything. With that, she was able to live as a woman, but wearing suits in pictures. And on my 13th birthday, I wanted to wear a tuxedo. My birthday's in August, and my mom was like, "Where am I going to find you a tuxedo? It's too hot." But I had to wear, little me that was exploring like queerness or exploring gender identity, had to wear a pinstripe shirt and slacks, because I saw it on Frida Kahlo and Marlene Dietrich. But knowing also too, I think of Frida now and her image and her life as like Disneyland or Disney World in a lot of ways, because Emilio was saying you see her on keychains, her image on keychains. So commodifying this image, and I wonder how many people know her. I mean, and even ourselves, right? I mean, we turn figures into mythology. She's been so mythologized as she was an actual person like you and me, and all of us here listening and watching and with questions, that these works came out of a mind. I can't, that is unbelievable to me that she was, saw herself at home and as just somebody's wife. Emilio writes that beautifully. I'm just somebody's wife, which is so funny to hear it now because she doesn't have perspective in the story the way we do. And we hear that line and we say, oh, woman, you are anything but, right? So I love those little moments where she is domestic and she's wifely, but we also see her struggling to put herself onto canvas. I think is beautiful for anybody who feels like they don't have a voice or struggling to express themselves.
I love that Monica touched on that, the fact that she's a human at the end of the day, because we do, like you said, like glorify these people and praise them in idolatry and almost make them larger than life, but they are just a regular person and to them, right, at least. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to call her Magdalena instead of Frida, to sort of remove that a little bit. And that's something that I want to explore too in the rewrites of what would Diego call her, and can I break the rules even if he did call her Frida? Can I have someone call her Magdalena? Is something that I want to explore, because right now we see it from like the crew perspective and people looking at the script. But if people are listening, that's something that I'm thinking about right now. If they're not listening to the stage direction, if they're just seeing the play, they might not pick up on, and if they didn't look at the playbill, they might not pick up on the fact that she's called Magdalena.
Yeah, we did talk about that. Like when specifically to use the name Magdalena, does anybody ever refer to her? Well, Arturo or Dieguito does, or Frida Kahlo. We have that one little moment, but how impactful would it be? Or what do we leave the audience with in terms of actually naming her? I think is a good one for Emilio. Yeah.
Those who are watching at home, can you guys tell us what you thought in the chat about about the use of her name? Just if you guys are wanting to share your opinions in the chat at all. There is, speaking of the chat, there is a question. Matthew asks, could you talk more to the fantasy aspects of the play? What inspired you to stretch the reality of the real world story?
I think for me, partly like my introduction or access point to theater was a lot of Latino theater. I gained interest in theater. I thought theater wasn't for me because people had exposed me to stuff like Fiddler on the Roof, and I was like, oh, I don't connect with this. But I really just needed a gateway, because now I can watch Fiddler on the Roof and appreciate the storytelling and craft, and that it is someone's story and it resonates with people. And I think that's a beautiful thing. But as an 18-year-old who had never seen a play before, I wasn't ready to make that jump. But I was able to connect with playwrights like Octavio Solis and Jose Rivera, and I was able to those were the people who hooked me into the world, and I was like, oh, theater is for me. And then from there I could expand into other things. Then I could be open to Shakespeare. Then I could be open to Tartuffe and all sorts of plays that are in the canon. But first I needed an access point, and that magical realism was a huge access point for me. And then also funny that Monica mentioned Disneyland, because I'm a huge Disney fan, and that's like total magic, and even like Shakespeare plays like Midsummer Night's Dream, where there's total fantasy, and as a kid reading a lot of fairy tales, I think I've always just been fascinated by the idea of fantasy, and more interested in when I get to see fantasy or fantasy elements in theater, because I feel like it asks not only the actors and the crew and the team to work their imagination, and the playwright to work their imagination, also asks the audience to work their imagination, because we can't see everything perfectly realistically. Even with $1 million budget, you can't see everything perfectly exactly in the creative sphere, right? Because if we're being honest, we can turn to the person next to us and say, well, you wouldn't be next to me if we're actually in this world. But we are asking everyone to use their imagination, and as a team, everyone turns on their imagination at the same time. And I think when we have plays with an element of fantasy, then it's interesting because we're all turning on our imagination at the same time, but we're all also seeing it a little bit differently. We can't tell what everyone's seeing, exactly what everyone's seeing in their imagination. So there's that element that I love about fantasy, and what I love both watching and being a creator. I think the impossible questions are things that I love. And I think I told Monica about this story about there was a Latino festival in Chicago, and they asked all the directors what was their favorite play, and they all said Matthew Olmos's play, because he had a stage direction that said something impossible happens, and every director was like, I want to be the one to stage that impossible thing. And so I think that like directors love the challenge of the impossible, actors love the challenge of living realistically and truthfully in the impossible, and for playwrights I think it's fun creating the rules of that impossible world, and then for audience getting to watch and enjoy and make connections with their own life, even though you're not seeing an exact replica of reality.
That's so beautiful, Emilio.
Thank you.
I agree. It's, I think having watched, having seen what you've done with, such an impossible time, right? Just the remote aspect, having to create together, and then bringing this piece to fruition out of, just your imagination, just things that, we're there, we're inspired by, Frida's piece, but like hadn't been put to paper yet. I think that you have really done magic, with this piece. And then everybody else, did their own magic, added their own magic to it. And I think that, being able to watch it, I really just want to thank you both for the roles that you played in making this magic happen. Sorry, that was a long long sentence, but run on. Have to run on. But yeah, I do just want to say that I'm really grateful for being able to watch it. And I think everybody kind of feels like they already know Frida Kahlo just from like reading things about her, probably, or Diego Rivera from like watching their like relationship unfold in multiple documentaries. I think that.
Can I touch on that real quick though?
Yeah.
Because that was for me part of the fun of researching, and that's why the coat was so fascinating to me.
Yes.
Because everyone, if you would ask people who are like casual fans, even in the writing group, we had some people who were like casual fans of Frida, and they're like, she wouldn't wear a fur coat though. She would dress like this, right? Like that's our image of Frida Kahlo. But I was like, but that's is so intriguing about the coat, is why is there a picture? There's proof. We can't argue. This was not Photoshop. Like we can't argue that this is like in a historical museum. So why was she wearing that? That was so interesting. Like what about American culture? Because she would not have worn that in Mexico. Like what about American culture got seeped into her and made her put on this fur coat? And then people always ask about, another thing people struggle with, that I got some feedback with the script, is Diego having some elements of capitalism, and because he is such a known communist, but a lot of people don't realize he got a $20,000 commission and paid his workers like $4 an hour. Like there was some capitalist mentality that seeped in. So what about America made both of these people so different than the stereotype or the image that we have of them? They both broke their own preconceived notions of who they are, and the legacy that we have of them. The woman who would never wear American high fashion, the man who would never support American capitalism, but they both did. And we have historical evidence of that. So what about that? That for me was a big question that was asked, and I actually appreciated that they asked that in the writers group. They said, why, that's not believable. And I said, and that is why I want to explore that magical element and explore that even more, because that's what people don't know. That actually is true. That's not my imagination, but how I'm getting there, that's my imagination kicking in.
Right. You're exploring the seduction of assimilation.
Absolutely.
Like, why is it so alluring? Yeah.
And I think it's so funny, Emilio, that you say that. People were like, that no one would ever believe that we think that we can own the story, and therefore our version of the story is the story.
Right.
And something impossible happens. I think is you saying, like, pulling away the curtain and saying we're all human, and they were they themselves are human and bought into things. I think that's why the story is so, where are we? It's disorienting in a lot of ways, right? In a good way, because it forces you to ask these questions, but then you're seeing these two people that no. It's like a story that has been set in stone, right? It's like, no, I know the Bible like this, right? Or whatever.
Right.
I don't know why I said the Bible, but like we know a story to be the story. And then when you really say, well, no, that's not the whole story. What exists inside of like the truth of what it was to be these two human beings, I think this is super fascinating.
Sorry. My computer just glitched and like told me that it was going to restart. So I just didn't want that to happen while we were talking.
Oh, yeah.
So sorry. Okay. So
Jocelyn was in her Amazon cart finalizing an order. No, I'm kidding.
So I just wanted to ask a question about your own personal experience and like your own involvement with American life, right? I wanted to know how have your own personal experiences with American life shaped how you feel about it? Is there anything that you'd like to speak on while we have the platform to do so?
That's a great question.
It's a loaded question. So.
Yeah. I think for me, I'm excited about being a part of many artists who are redefining what the stereotype of people of color are, writers of color, the box that we're often put in, and what kind of stories we can tell. And I think the first thing people in response might say to that is, well, why'd you write a play about Frida Kahlo? All Latinos have that on there. All Latino playwrights have that on their resume. And I would say, yeah, you're right. Most of us do have that on our resume. We do have a play about Frida, but I wanted to see what could be different instead of a historically accurate play or a play that authentically replicates Frida's life. What is it like to use Frida as this access point to ask larger questions about what is it like to be Latino in America, and how does that parallel with today, and to ask those larger questions, and then to also explore things like comedy. I remember when I showed this script to some people, they said, well, is it going to be poetic or is it going to be comedy? Because you're trying to do both right now. That came up in the writing group too, right? And I was like, yeah, because I want to do both, because I don't have to be limited. Just because I'm Latino doesn't mean I have to either write slapstick comedy or write magical poetry. I can do both in the same script, because y'all allowed Tennessee Williams to write whatever he want. Y'all allowed Eugene O'Neill to write whatever he want. So we can do that too, this next generation. But we have to allow each other to break out of that mold and to break our own rules and to create our own paths of what we want our stories to be. And so I think I'm excited about being a part of this new generation of theater artists of color who are saying we can come up with our own label and our own parameter of what each individual person wants to be identified as a creator, rather than being one box or one style for everyone to try and fit in. It's like, okay, let's make a bunch of boxes and everyone, create their own box, and then smash that cardboard box on your next play, and then smash the cardboard box on your next play. And you just continue to reinvent yourself in the way that so many other playwrights in the past have been able to do. I love that Paula Vogel says, never write the same play or never tell the same story twice. And if you look at her work, like every play is like completely different. And I want to do that same thing. And I want to be a part of this cultivation of artists, particularly artists of color, who want to do the same thing and explore new stories every time they work on a project.
Yeah, everything Emilio just said. I stand here and I applaud writers, Latino writers, Latina writers who are contributing to the American theater canon about time and long overdue. So I'm just grateful to the Vagrancy for including this story and Emilio and including me to be a part of it, because I know Emilio's joking about every play, a Latino playwright has a Frida Kahlo play. Maybe, but, or maybe not, but I think that your voice is here, right? And I look forward to the future of what else you produce, Emilio, what comes out of your head, and then the subsequent generations that are writing about our experience, that are writing about the now times, so that they see themselves on stage more and more, and we hear more of our stories, and we're not separate from the mainstream, but we are the mainstream. We are just as embedded in the mainstream as any other conversation, as any other story. I'm looking forward to that. That has changed my perspective about working on this. It's like, oh man, where else are we going to go, and what else are we going to do? I'm excited.
I think I'm excited too. Just hearing you guys talk each other up has me hyped. So I want to ask you, these are going to be, unless the audience has another question, these are going to be our last two questions. I want to ask you, there's been a lot of talk about, writing a new iteration of this play. I want to know, beyond that, beyond writing a next version of this, how will you carry this experience forward, with yourself, like on a personal level? Monica, do you want to go first?
Sure. What the main thing that I'm taking so much from this process in a lot of different ways, but I think personally how I want to move forward with this is with bravery for my own art, and with permission to speak and giving myself more permission to exist. That sounds so weird. I didn't to say, because now I'm thinking like, do I feel that way? And I guess, to a degree I do, but permission to continue to search and to find a version of myself that I think is worthy of seeing the light of day in terms of artistic, whatever happens. Continuing to see what happens with the play, and again, what else Emilio does. I think that when I see artists like Emilio who write and listen and create and go back to the drawing board and do it again, I stand in admiration of it, because I think I would wonder if I thought I was done with the story, and that you keep going and mining is encouraging to me to keep going and mining in areas of my life in terms of representation, Latina theater in the United States, all of that.
Yeah, I think for me the takeaway or the continuation process is just this idea of sometimes we don't realize how big our network is until we're asked to explore that. So I remember when Caitlin asked, if there's any directors I had in mind, I was like, I don't think I know any directors, particularly directors who would be interested in this question of the experience of being American and Latino at the same time, identifying as both, and the struggles with that. And then I just remembered that I had worked on this project at OU with Monica, and we actually hadn't worked together. We were just in the room as directors on separate projects. And I loved Monica's speaking voice. I remember she was talking during the meeting, and I just private messaged her like, "I love your speaking voice." That is all I want to say. And but that experience was the bridge that introduced me to Monica, and then getting to work with her on this process. I can't imagine a better director that I would know to help me create this process, create this story, create this world, and that she had all of these great actors that she knew in her network. And I think that's hopefully inspiring for creators. If there's any creators watching, like, you have a network. Even if you just have to take a minute, think, what else have you done? And then connect the dots and realize your network is so much bigger than you think it is. And there's nothing stopping you from creating other than yourself telling you that you can't do it. But when you stop and think and write out and plan out, who do I know? What do I know? What can I create? Where can I create it? Sky's the limit, especially on Zoom. Now, this digital world, it's so easy. You can connect with people from all over the world.
Totally.
And then thinking about that on the opposite end, like, Monica was just in the room, you know, and then now she's like, you know, directing your play, you know, like, that's incredible. It's such a, you know, it's such a creative experience, I think, you know, like, uniquely, like, like, just somebody who's like, I hear your voice, and I like that. I like your vibe. That's networking.
Oh yeah, 100%. When I got that email from Emilio, like, "Hey, do you want to direct something?" I said, "Yes, absolutely, I do, 100%." And I'm just so happy with how it all happened, and just being in the process has been so extraordinary. I just loved every minute of it. I loved talking, and sometimes not even knowing what was going to come out of our conversations or what was going to come out of a draft that you wrote. But the more we talked, the more ideas bounced around. We wondered, like, is this the story? And like you were saying, poetry and comedy. Yes. Why the hell not? Why can't they coexist? But all of our sitting around and you're saying, like, well, yeah, maybe it's this, has been such a gift.
Mutual. I feel the same way.
So, yay.
A gift just to be on the call with you guys. So this is going to be our final question, and I'm sad about it. So I'm gonna ask it. Do you have any final words of affirmation for the folks who might be watching right now? If you don't, that's okay.
I think I'm really inspired by there's a play, oh man, I just forgot his name. But he wrote this play called The Play You Want, and it was all like mocking what American theater wants a Latino playwright to write about. And it was so brilliant. I love this script, and I think that's my advice to creatives. I think that's such a cool project, is like to do the project, write, direct, act in, whatever, even if it's just like a Zoom reading with your friends. Do the project that you think everybody wants you to do, and then find the space to then do the project that you actually resonates with you. And I think doing those side by side, as close as you can, as Monica mentioned, proximity is important, right? Because then if too much time passes between them, the connection's lost. So doing those things as close to possible, again, even if it's just like a Zoom reading of like, this is the play that people think I am, and this is the play that I am, like in close proximity. I think there's so many questions about who are you actually as an artist, and how would you define yourself as an artist if you didn't feel like there was a mold that you had to fit in to get work. Would be such a cool challenge that I would love to see creatives do. And I would love if creatives invited me into seeing both of those side by side. I think that would just be such a fascinating process to watch someone figure out themselves by doing what they think is the stereotype and what they think is the limitation, and then what they think is the possibility or the impossible of where their heart actually lies.
I love that. Ditto. Yeah. Write, submit, create, color, draw, skip, sing, dance, do whatever your heart is calling you to do, especially now in these times when things can feel heavy. Get messy, go play. We forget how to play. And what I loved about this process was that it was all play. And like Emilio said in the beginning, this is still a draft. Everything is a draft. So don't be afraid to just put it on paper, put it on canvas, put it, on your feet. Do what you need to do to express yourselves. Don't be afraid to try, to fall, to get up and do it again. Just keep doing it. Just keep on. Even when you're tired, just keep on, keep going. And enjoy it. Enjoy it. It's called play, right? It's called play. So play more. That's what I got.
Oh, thank you both so much for talking with me today. And thank you to everyone who lent their time and talents to this incredible production, as well as this incredible play series. Thank you to the Vagrancy, and thank you especially to those who are watching and sharing space.